Welcome into Scoop and Score. My name's Tanner. Today I'm going to be breaking down number 9 Alabama at number 11 Ole Miss. This game's Saturday, November the 12th at 3:30 on CBS. It's CBS's game of the week. And before we get into this one, I just wanted to say if you could give me a like on this video if you enjoy it and subscribe to the channel. Those both help me out a ton, especially as a new channel trying to get started here, trying to get a community growing. Where we can all talk about college football. So if you could do those two things for me, I would greatly appreciate it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this one, starting with the Alabama offense against the Ole Miss defense. Alabama, even though they have the two losses, is still number 4 in my power ratings, and there's a reason for that. It's because they don't really have a weakness on offense or defense, and we'll get to the defense here in a second. But offensively, they're top 35 in every category, top 20 in most categories. They average 5.73 yards per carry, 8.05 yards per pass attempt, and 6.88 yards per play. So they're a pretty elite offense in almost every single category, every single statistic. Maybe not elite, great to elite in every single statistic. And then they're facing a pretty bad Ole Miss defense. Ole Miss allows 112.4% of opponent rush averages, 104.3% of opponent pass averages, and 107% of opponent total averages. The big one that jumps out to me there is 112.4% of opponent rush averages, because Alabama is a good rushing offense with Jahmyr Gibbs. And that leads me into some players to watch for Alabama. Obviously, Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young's probably out of Heisman contention after the loss to LSU. The stats aren't really there for him this year either. And I'll cut him some slack because everybody forgets that he's playing hurt. I'm sure he's still playing hurt. He got hurt, 3 weeks ago against Tennessee with a separated shoulder. I'm sure he's still feeling that. So cut Bryce Young some slack. He's still one of the most elite quarterbacks in the country. He's definitely, in my opinion, probably the most elite quarterback in the country at evading pressure and getting out of the pocket and just making plays out of nothing. The next player to watch for Alabama is obviously Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back. Jahmyr Gibbs, with Alabama having the 2 losses, he's probably out of Heisman contention too. I would say outside of Blake Corum, he's probably, you can make an argument that he's the best or most talented back in the country, but I would say Blake Corum's probably the best back in the country, or the only back in Heisman contention at this point. And then my third player to watch for Alabama is their leading receiver, Ja'Corey Brooks. I think he's the only receiver that's really flashed at all to me for Alabama this season, so keep an eye out for him. He's who Bryce Young likes to look for on those plays where Bryce Young makes something out of nothing. So let's go ahead and flip sides of the ball here, talk about the Ole Miss offense against the Alabama defense. And Alabama on defense, again, 13th in total defense, 14th in scoring defense, 11th in rushing defense. I guess you can point to their passing defense as a weakness at 29th. Not really. That's still good to great. And then opponent red zone efficiency is the stat I like to put on the screen, but it's somewhat worthless in terms of projections. I wouldn't say worthless. It's worth throwing on there. It's worth noting, but it's not a super important stat. And 51st is average. It's not bad at all. But Ole Miss comes in this game offensively. We'll talk about the Ole Miss offense here. They are an elite rushing offense at 5.93 yards per carry, 8.47 yards per attempt or pass attempt, and 6.64 yards per play. Their yards per pass attempt is actually at 8.47. It's actually a really good number, but they just don't throw the ball much. They heavily lean towards their run. They're the number 3 overall rush offense in the country in terms of raw statistics, and 5.93 yards per carry is a pretty elite rush number as well. The problem for them is they're facing an elite Alabama defense. 63.4% of opponent rush averages is an absolutely elite number against the run for Alabama. Alabama's allowing 80.5% of opponent pass averages, which isn't an elite number, but it's a pretty great number. I would say that's definitely top 10 in the country. And then Alabama allows 73.4% of opponent total averages, which is a pretty solid number as well. I would call that great to elite is where I would put that. But some players to watch out for the Ole Miss offense are going to be Quinshon Judkins, running back. He's the workhorse for Ole Miss. Their leading rusher. Uh, I didn't note it, but I would say he's got to be one of the leading rushers in the country in terms of raw numbers, just because Ole Miss leans on the run so heavily this year. My next player to watch out for Ole Miss is going to be quarterback Jackson Dart. He's not the best passer out there, good enough to get it done for them. Again, they're averaging 8.47 yards per attempt, which kind of surprised me. But he does get it done as a runner. I didn't write down the exact number, but I did make a mental note that he's averaging right around 5 yards per carry and running the ball himself. And then his favorite target to go to is their leading wide receiver, Jonathan Mingo. So again, Ole Miss doesn't run the ball or pass the ball too much, but when they do, he's their favorite target. So watch out for him. So let's go ahead and get into the Vegas line here before we get into the model. Vegas has Alabama favored in this game by 11.5. So Alabama minus 11.5. And the over-under on this game is at 65. ESPN's FPI has this game at Alabama at a 75.3% chance to win and LSU at a 24.7% chance to win. And I think that FPI number is mostly in line with the Vegas number. If anything, it's slightly closer to what I would expect out of a 2-touchdown favorite in terms of percent chance to win. But overall, it doesn't jump out to me as being like totally off. I think it's pretty much in line. So before we get to the model, one more thing I wanted to talk about. So how does Ole Miss pull the upset? In my opinion, I think the best way to get it done against Alabama is to try to throw over the top of them, because I still think their secondary is a little bit shaky after what I saw against Tennessee, given Tennessee is an elite pass offense. But Ole Miss isn't that. So I think Ole Miss needs to try to steal the script from LSU. LSU really surprised me how well they were able to run the ball in that game. All the teams that have beaten Bama since 2015, I know I say this stat all the time, but you don't beat Bama typically by running the ball on them. You have to get 8 yards per attempt, so you have to be able to run the ball enough to keep them honest and then be able to throw it on them. And LSU didn't do that. They're the first team to break the model in the past, 7 years? So yeah, they're the first team to beat Alabama running the ball, or by primarily running the ball on them in the past 7 years. So if I'm Ole Miss, I'm looking at that film, figure out how LSU was able to do that and trying to replicate it. Again, I don't think Ole Miss is a great passing team. I do think they're going to struggle to move the ball through the air against what I think is still a really good pass rush, still one of the best pass rushers in the country in Alabama. I don't think the Alabama pass rush is as dominant as we thought it was going to be coming into the season, but again, I still think they're one of the best in the country. I think with that being said, I think Ole Miss is probably going to have to steal a possession or two in the turnovers, but that's hard to predict. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the model here. The model has Alabama winning this game 42-24. And it has Alabama at 518 yards total, 6.4 yards per carry, 8.4 yards per attempt, and 7.4 yards per play. The model has Ole Miss at 362 yards total, 3.8 yards per carry, 6.8 yards per pass attempt, and 4.9 yards per play. And again, it has the score at 42-24 in favor of Alabama. I do think the score is a little bit inflated for Alabama. Their offense has been a little bit off for the past couple weeks, and again, I think that's due to Bryce Young being hurt. I'm not a Bama fan, so I'm not making excuses for Alabama, but just objectively, I think that's because Bryce Young's not quite 100%. I don't know if he will be all year or for the rest of the year, so I think that number is a little bit inflated for Alabama again, but I don't think it's too far off. So let's go ahead and get into my personal prediction here. And I think it's just a little bit inflated for both teams. So I have this game at 34-17. Again, say what you want about Alabama still being in the top 4 of my power rating, and what you want about them having 2 losses in general. There's a reason they're still number 4 in my power rating. And if Vegas were to put out a power rating, I'd venture to say they're still in the top 4, maybe 5. And again, there's a reason for it. Once you get outside of the top four teams in my power ratings, which I'll go ahead and name them real quick in case you haven't seen them for this week. I have Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, and Alabama 4. And again, once you get outside those 4 teams, almost every team has at least one pretty glaring weakness. Not necessarily like terrible, like in the hundreds in terms of a ranking, in terms of a statistic, but at least one statistic or one facet of their game that you can turn on the film or look at and point to. Like, a good team will probably be able to exploit that. And the top 4 teams just simply don't have a weakness like that. A couple examples that just jumped out to me is Tennessee's pass defense, for example. I think if they're not the worst in the country, they're certainly in the bottom 5 in terms of just raw numbers and pass defense. And their adjusted numbers are right there too. Their pass defense is pretty bad, and that's just, once you get into the elite team, somebody's going to exploit that. And Georgia was able to exploit that and shut down Tennessee's pass offense for the most part, and then you just can't keep up. So I think Ole Miss is going to run into that problem too. A couple examples for them in this game is Ole Miss is not great in pass offense, and then they're actually pretty bad against rush defense, giving up what did I say, 112, I believe. Yeah, Ole Miss gives up 112.4 of opponent rush averages. And again, the top 4 teams just don't have a statistic like that. So that's why I have this game at 34-17. I have Alabama covering, even though they've had the 2 losses and look a little shaky as of late. I have Alabama bouncing back and covering in this game. But anyway, go ahead and give me your scores and opinions down in the comments. I want to hear from everybody. I'm trying to grow a community here, so I do want to hear everybody's thoughts on this game. So give me your scores and thoughts down in the comments. Again, thanks for watching. If you could, give me a like and subscribe to the channel. But that's all from me today, guys. Peace.